welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Chantel and I have a digital planner shop called Paper and Roses. And so I have been an iPad user since I got my hands on my very first iPad and Apple Pencil a few years back. And ever since then, I have had the opportunity to pretty much try every iPad that is in the current lineup. And I get asked all of the time by people in my real life and people on the internet, because all of my content really surrounds iPads and how to use them, which iPad they should get. And I think this is kind of a nuanced decision. There is a lot of iPads available to buy right now, but what I'm gonna be focusing on the most here today is not so much the technicalities. There are so many amazing YouTubers that go over all of the specs in great detail. I will be talking about specs a little bit as it pertains to price point, but I'm gonna be talking a lot more about use case scenario, because to be honest with you, when I was buying my first iPad, I wouldn't have even have known what kind of specs to even look for and how much I needed to spend to begin with. So I know if you're looking at the Apple website right now, you might be a little bit overwhelmed by the choices available for you. And trust me, I was as well. I made a chart and you can check that down below with every single iPad available in the lineup and how much storage it has and how that affects the price point. And I even kind of broke it down into value per gigabyte so you can kind of see exactly what you're getting. Obviously not everything is 100% measurable in that way, but I found that chart really helpful when I was kind of deciding where I was gonna go with this video. So I'm definitely gonna leave it down below, because some of those things can change the price points of the things we're talking about, specifically when you're looking at storage. So the iPads that we're talking about today are the iPad 9th generation basic iPad, the iPad 10th generation, the iPad mini 6, the iPad Air 5, and the iPad Pro 11-inch, and the iPad Pro 12.9-inch. This is gonna be a pretty in-depth video because I took it really seriously, and I take it very seriously when I think about what I would recommend other people do with their money. So I thought I would just go ahead and get that out of the way. This might be a little bit longer of a video. If you kind of just want to know the long and the short of it, I'm gonna go ahead and recommend what you probably already have seen is the route to go for you. If you're looking for something to just use casually, I highly recommend getting the iPad Generation 9. Even if you're just not sure how much you're gonna use an iPad in general, this is the route I recommend starting with. I started with an iPad 6th generation and an Apple Pencil Generation 1 myself, and I've never regretted that purchase. I was a lot more comfortable spending a lot more on an iPad later on after I had already known I'd got my price per use way down, because now I use an iPad every day. So this is my fail-safe recommendation for an investment of like $300-ish. It's exactly $329 actually. I think that this is an incredible value. You can do the vast majority of things that you can do on all of these other iPads on this iPad. Questions I already know people are gonna ask me about this. Can you digital note take on this? Absolutely, you can. Can you use Procreate on this? Absolutely, you can. All right, my first recommendation out of the way, we're gonna be looking at some more iPads, and they are quite a fair bit more expensive. And whether or not I could tell you I think that's worth it to you is going to be entirely relative. So what I would encourage you to do is to think about your use case scenario, because I really believe no one can tell you what your use case scenario is worth to you. There are some people that invest really heavily in their home working situations, in really expensive monitors, in really nice furniture. And I mean, technically you could sit on anything, right? You don't need to have like a really nice couch. This is just a random example, but it's all just to say like what it's gonna be worth to you is going to depend on what you're using it for and what that time is of value to you. For instance, for me, I personally use a pretty high-end version of the iPad, and that is because I use my iPad every single day for productivity and creativity primarily. And those are high value tasks to me. So I like to have nice to have features to make those high value tasks more enjoyable. It's worth it to me, but it's just gonna depend on what that is going to be worth to you. So if you're looking for something to use just casually, I would obviously recommend saving your money, choosing a more budget option. But maybe if you're looking at using this for productivity, creativity, maybe this is gonna be something you use to study, to goal set, to create digital art, then maybe some of those nice to have features would be nice for you to have. Now that I've got all my disclaimers out of the way, let's get into it. So the first thing I'm gonna go ahead and say while you're looking at all of the iPads available on the site right now, I would personally just stay away from cellular connectivity. I personally don't think it's worth the spend. There have been very few situations where I've needed to use data right on my iPad. I'm usually using my iPad at home or somewhere where I have Wi-Fi, and on the off chance I'm somewhere where I'm not at home and I don't have Wi-Fi, I have the hotspot on my phone, so I'm usually using that anyways, and I don't feel like I need to carry a data plan on both devices. And I know that might seem like a relatively small thing, but it does add up, especially when you're looking at the more budget iPads. So this particular iPad is the Wi-Fi version, and it is $329 just with Wi-Fi, but as soon as you just add cellular connectivity, it goes up $130. And personally, I would save that money and spend it on the pencil, and then you're gonna be getting really like 99% of an iPad use case. The amount of storage you choose is gonna pretty drastically impact the price point, and even though the higher you go with storage, the more value you're getting price per gigabyte, there does come a point where you're probably looking at too much for your use case scenario. So I would just kind of encourage you to think about how much storage you realistically need. And if you start looking at the higher level storage options, configurations of the more budget level iPads, you start to get into the price point of the next level up. For instance, the base model iPad is $329 starting out, but you can up the storage on this and add cellular connectivity. And if you do, it is a $609 device. And at this point, you're basically in that price point of some of the higher end iPads, and you might want to consider them. So just something to keep in mind. All right, so let's get into each of these iPads. This first iPad I've already talked about. It's $329. It has your A13 Bionic chip, and I think it is absolutely incredible value for the price. Like we've already talked about, using this iPad, you have access to all the same writing and drawing tools that you do on the other iPads. Although it comes in a little bit less of a modern looking device, it still is quite functional, and it works with the Apple Pencil Generation 1. I personally was only comfortable spending more on an iPad once I knew my cost per use was way down, once I knew this was something I was using every single day. So I would even encourage you to start out small, and you can always up your budget and trade it in and get a new one later once you know that it's something that's worth the investment for you. Now, if the design of your iPad is something that's important to you, the iPad 9th generation is definitely an older look of the iPad, and we now have an iPad 10th generation. So this is also in your base model style iPad, but it looks so nice and modern and fresh, and it is actually the only iPad that comes in these really bright and fun colors right now. All of the other iPads come in pretty muted colors, but you've got like bright pink and yellow and blue in this iPad, so I can really understand if you are someone who's looking at this for creative tech, why the look and the aesthetic of your iPad might be important to you. So you might want to take a look at this. It does have a nice little spec bump as well. It's got your A14 chip, so you're looking at something that's a little bit faster, and it's also got the camera in the landscape view, and I can confirm this is really nice when you're taking video calls. All of the other iPads have the camera on the short side of the iPad, and so most of us are taking our calls and using our iPad in landscape view, whether that's like in a keyboard or just propped up somewhere. And so your camera is off to the side. So it always looks like you're looking off to the side. Whereas when you're using this, you're looking straight at the camera here. It does look really nice. The other thing is that they updated it to being a USB-C instead of a Lightning connector. And although that is an update and it's nice, it's easier to connect drives to and things, is that it still works with the Apple Pencil Generation 1. And I actually don't have any problem with the Apple Pencil Generation 1. I think they work quite similarly. You just need to get the adapter. And I know some people have like a huge issue with getting an adapter. So if you're the kind of person who doesn't want to add another thing, I would either stick with the Generation 9 or look up at the iPad Air. But if you're somebody who really likes this and you don't mind getting the adapter, I think it's a great device, and I have a great experience every time I use this iPad. Next up, we're gonna take a look at the iPad Mini 6. And I'm not gonna lie, I absolutely love this thing. It is shockingly functional for the size, and it's got a nice little spec update as well that you can you can notice when you're using something like this over something like the Generation 9 iPad, you can definitely notice this is a much snappier experience. It's got the A15 chip, but what I really, really like about this particular iPad is now we're starting to get the features that I think are the nice to have features. And my number one nice to have feature is a laminated display for a couple of reasons. So in both of the models that we just looked at, the displays are not laminated. And all that means is that there's a tiny little gap underneath the screen. And so when you're drawing, you have like the tiniest bit of lag. And I really cannot stress enough, it is absolutely minuscule. It is so small. But once you use the laminated display, it's really nice and it's hard to go back. The other thing I like about it is I like the screen better. And I also really, really love that the other nice to have feature that I like in this model is it works with the Apple Pencil Generation 2. And although I think the functionality of the Apple Pencil is quite similar between the 1 and the 2, and honestly the price points are the same as well, what I like about the Generation 2 Apple Pencil is that it connects magnetically like this. So you always have your Apple Pencil with your iPad and it's always charged and I never lose it, whereas I lose the Generation 1 Apple Pencil all of the time. All right, so although this does have a lot of those like nice to have features, I do think this is kind of a niche product for someone who actually prioritizes a smaller screen. So if you're someone who travels a bunch, or maybe you're using this primarily to like read or something and you just want to have it for some, like access to some of the other functions that an iPad has, then I would recommend something like this. But if you're using this primarily to like study, to note take, to draw, you probably are gonna want a bigger screen. I know for me personally, as much as I love this particular iPad, it could never be my only iPad. I will say though, it's my favorite iPad to play games on, and it's my favorite iPad to travel with. It almost feels like I'm playing with a Nintendo Switch. I really like it for that. If this is something that you're gonna get to play some games on, if you have a little bit of a higher budget for a leisure device, highly recommend. And next up, we're gonna take a look at the iPad Air 5. And this is the sweet spot for a lot of people. I find myself recommending this to a lot of the people who have a little bit more of a budget, maybe because they're a student, maybe because they already know that they're going to use their iPad a lot, maybe because they are updating their iPad from an older version of the base model iPad and they're looking for something new. They already know they're gonna use it. This is often what I recommend because you're really getting a practically pro level device at a reasonable cost, I think. And again, worth is relative, so it really depends on what your budget is, but I think you're getting a really fabulous device here. You've got quite a spec update once you start to get into the iPad Air 5. It has your M1 chip, so it is super fast and you get access to a lot of those pro level features like Stage Manager. So I am pretty excited about the iPad Air, and I think that if this was not my job and I was upgrading from the base model iPad right now, this is probably the route that I would go as well. This is quite a jump from your basic iPad. It's got all the nice to have features. So it works with your Apple Pencil Generation 2, and it has a gorgeous laminated display. It's got an updated chip, and you get access to basically all the pro level features. I highly recommend this particular iPad. And if this one is in your price range, and you're just kind of looking for a little bit more direction of which storage configuration to get, I actually think the 256 gigabyte version of this particular iPad is a pretty strong contender here when it comes to having all of the nice to have features, and I think that's more than ample enough storage for most people. All right, and now we're getting into those pro level devices. So your 11-inch and your 12.9, these start out with higher storage configurations to begin with, and they obviously are pretty pricey. They both have M2 chips, like the current ones are all spec'd out with M2 chips, and these are touted as the iPads for really pro level work. Think like heavy video editing, 3D rendering, things like that. You've even got some exclusive features in the M2 iPad Pros, like the Apple Pencil hover feature, which is pretty cool. But I would say outside of the few people who need that kind of like M2 power for their really pro level devices, you can probably get away with going with the iPad Air over one of the pro level iPads. On a personal level, up until recently, I was using the iPad 11 Pro, and I've really loved this. I've used it for a really long time. And I just recently updated to the 12.9 Pro myself. And again, taking a look at my chart, I would say if you're looking at the 128 or the 256 configurations, specifically of the 11-inch iPad Pro, then you might want to consider the iPad Air 5. It's cheaper and it really does have a lot of those same features, and they're practically the same size as well. So you're getting almost the same device, and you probably could get away with the Air. These two are so similar, they're even compatible with the same accessories, so they both work with the Magic Keyboard, things like that. So it is definitely something to consider. In my opinion, because the iPad Air 5s exist right now, I really only think the 11-inch iPad Pro is worth it if you really like this size and you need something with 512 gigabytes or more of storage. Or I guess if you really want a ProMotion display, and a ProMotion display is 120 hertz refresh rate. Other than that, I think you can get away with the iPad Air 5. And finally, you've got the 12.9-inch iPad Pro, and this is what I use now, and I'm not gonna lie, I absolutely love the 12.9-inch size. I'd been using like an 11-inch for the longest time, and so when I switched to the 12.9 myself, it was actually a little bit of a learning curve to get used to the larger size and the scale of my handwriting. But once I did get used to it, I gotta say that I am taken aback by how much I love this. And I find myself using features like Stage Manager so much more on the 12.9-inch device. It is so big that I'm able to get like a good size for all of the windows, even if I'm using like 3 windows in a screen. So you can see it's quite a bit larger, and when I'm using this with the Magic Keyboard, it really feels like a laptop replacement to me. And that's one of those like hot button questions, right? Like, for this price, do I think that the iPad 12.9 is a replacement for a laptop? For me, or a computer in general? For me, it's not. And that's only because some of the design softwares and the video softwares that I prefer to use for my business are only available on Mac OS right now. They're not available on iPad OS. I would recommend, and outside of those things, I'm pretty much using my iPad exclusively. So what I would recommend, if you're someone who is actually really thinking about getting the 12.9 as a laptop replacement, and I know a lot of people who do this in my real life who have just an iPad as their main device, I would just double check. I would just go in and double check and see if everything is available that you want to use for iPad OS. And if it is, I think this is as close as you can get to a laptop replacement. Although, again, for me, I can't say that that this could be my only device just yet. And one other thing to kind of keep in mind, if you're set on the Pro line and you're going between the 12.9 and the 11-inch, I will say once you get to the 12.9-inch, this is really starting to feel like a laptop in size and in weight. So I had kind of leaned towards the 11-inch when I was first upgrading, because the 11-inch fits in, I was commuting to work at the time, and the 11-inch fits in all of my primary work bags, and the 12.9 does not. So I don't commute anymore, and so now I'm able to use like a 12.9 since I work from my house. The portability doesn't matter so much. But I would just kind of double check if this is something that you're going to be carrying to and from work. Just go ahead and double check to see if it fits in your bags and how you like to commute. And that's everything that's available to buy brand new right now. And not to give you like more choices to consider, but if you are open to looking at some of the older versions of some of these iPads, particularly older versions of the iPad Pros and older versions of the iPad Air, you can get some killer deals on the renewed and refurbished versions of these devices. If you're very good at looking at sourcing used tech, of course, like, you have the whole internet to consider, but if you're not, I actually highly recommend checking out Apple's Refurbished, their certified refurbished site. And although like the stock might vary, I recommend looking at the iPad Air 4s specifically. And honestly, any version of the iPad Pro that's in the the square design, like the Refresh design. There are iPad Pros that look like your base model iPad. I wouldn't go for these. I would go for the new design, but you can get a lot more storage this way. And a couple of things that I just wanted to say about the Refurbished devices, and I'm just looking so I can double check that I get it right. But all Apple's Refurbished devices come with a new battery, a new outer shell, and they've got a 1-year warranty with free delivery and free returns, and they come to you brand new in a box. So with all the accessories and cables. So you're really getting like a practically new experience too. So what I will say, like what's available on the site might vary, but if you are looking at new devices right now, it's worth just checking out the site and seeing if anything you are interested in is at a price point that you might be interested in as well. So yeah, there's a lot of thought that can go into an iPad purchase. So just to kind of reiterate all of the things that we have been talking about, I would recommend the iPad Generation 9 as my #1 choice for the vast majority of people. So if you're a beginner, you just kind of want to dabble, this is the route I would recommend going. If you are looking for a beginner's device, but you kind of just want that refreshed look, you kind of want something that looks a little bit more modern, I would take a look at the iPad 10th generation. If you have an older version of these iPads, or you have a higher budget, you know that you're gonna be using this iPad on a frequent basis, I recommend the iPad Air 5. This has basically all of the nice to have features, and it's the sweet spot between like a pro level device and a base level device. And as much as I love the iPad mini, I would just make sure that you want a device this small, especially if it's gonna be your only tablet. So I would highly recommend going into the store and kind of double checking to see if this size works for you. If it does, I have nothing bad to say about it. I think the iPad mini is spectacular. I would just double check to see if the size works for you, especially if you're using it for creative tech purposes, for note taking, for the kind of things I think about when I'm thinking about using an iPad. Just double check to see if the screen size is something that works for you. And then of course, if you have it to spend, you're never gonna regret like an iPad Pro, like how it performs. These are amazing. They're just very expensive, so just gotta think about if that makes sense for you. If you want an iPad Pro and you don't wanna spend like the current iPad Pro prices, definitely check out like the certified refurbished site. You can get some pretty epic deals on these as well. So that was a lot of information and I hope it was helpful. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It helps me create more content like this. If you have any questions, which I'm sure you do, drop them down below and I will answer as many of them as I can. And if other people are watching this as well, they can go down there and answer some of your questions as well. That way you'll get like a really good idea of what is available and what people's experiences are like. If you like videos like this and you'd like to see more, please go ahead and like and subscribe and I'll catch you next time. Bye.